What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about cha-ching, Elric of Melnibone. So for those that don't know, last year I made a decision that I was going to start digging into these roots. The roots of things that I love, like grimdark and dark fantasy and just crazy shit, right? And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to finish the Black Company series this year. And it's also why I'm getting into Elric with a couple people down at the Discord. And now, guys, we are going to be covering the 8 books, but we're covering them in chronological order, not in publication order. So for those that don't know, that order is vastly different, and it should create quite an interesting feel. But we're all looking forward to that. So either way, I really just, I'm excited to get into that character. This guy, Elric, is supposedly like the granddad of Grimdark. Let's get into it. So here in Elric of Melnibone, we are introduced to the character of Elric as well as Melnibone. So Melnibone is the Dragon Isles. It's like almost like a secret island that the Melniboneans inhabit. And now Elric is the emperor of the Melniboneans. We know that his father was once an emperor, and after he had died, Elric basically took over. And with the story now, it has introduced us to both its new emperor, Elric, as well as just kind of introduced us to the land of Melnibone. It also starts to introduce us very quickly to the understanding that Elric is not like other Melniboneans. For one, he's an albino. And his blood seems to be weak, and he is forced to basically be, an addict. He has to continually use drugs just to kind of keep himself afloat. But it's not just his skin color or maybe his weak blood that sets him apart from the rest of his people. It's also the way that the way he runs the show here. There are plenty of Melniboneans that disagree with the tactics and the way that Elric runs Melnibone. They're just not really getting on board. And Elric kind of finds the Melniboneans to be decadent, and it's an interesting scene that is painted right out the gate. Like I said, you have these people and you have their emperor, and they're not exactly seeing eye to eye. Now, very quickly into the story, we see Melnibone come under attack by strangers from the outside, and we see that Elric, his hand has been forced in some ways, and we are getting to really get that view of what other Melniboneans think versus what Elric thinks. There's a lot of almost like dick measuring contest kind of stuff being played out here, but either way, Melnibone is under attack, and this really sets off a string of events that really is the meat and potatoes of this story. From here, we will see the plot to overthrow Elric. We'll get that betrayal. We'll also see Elric as he's put in this position where he's forced to make deals with elemental kings, as well as gods of chaos. This story will also eventually bring us to this point where we establish the twin rune blades, Stormbringer and Mournblade. The story has a very fast pace, and that's kind of what I want to get into here. The book isn't even 200 pages. I know I got this big book, but I'm only covering Elric of Melnibone. There's a bunch of extra stuff in this edition that I have. But you're talking about a story that's less than 200 pages long, and it's structured where it's going to bring you from plot point to plot point or action point to action point, whichever way you want to, say it. The thing, it's to me, when I read it, it really had a comic book or a graphic novel feel as far as that. Realistically, we cover an insane amount of ground in less than 200 pages. Michael Moorcock has quite the adventure for the reader here, but you are jumping from one thing to the next. That's how he's able to cram all that gram into that golden gram. If you remember that fucking commercial from the back in the day. I kind of want to keep with this feel, right? Because I know, I don't want people to start getting angry. Oh, you said it feels like a comic. I'm like, dude, look, I love comics. But in all, I'm trying to be honest. Like, it does have that, like, the way it's structured, it has a comic book feel. And not only that, it's older, guys, right? This thing, I think this one came out in the 70s. There's no way it's not going to feel somewhat dated, but that dated part kind of goes back into that comic book feel. Like, there's a lot of, like, the internal monologuing, which will be like, like, oh, Elric is crafty, that, that son of a gun, kind of thing. There's a little bit of that in there. It's, like I said, this thing, it's older, and it has a comic book feel as far as the structure and just the internal monologuing and just some of the vibes. But that's not a bad thing, especially if you're looking for something that has a older feel, that classical feel. This is one hell of a fantasy journey. It's just, yes, you are going to feel, when comparing it to today's fantasy, quite a bit of difference. Next, I just want to really talk about Elric, the character of Elric, because this is the guy, right? This is the whole reason why we're reading this series. But yeah, Elric is definitely a very visual character. Michael Moorcock does a great job of painting Elric, and he definitely is like a contrast against the scene a lot of times. They're talking about this albino character with his red eyes. He's got the white skin, white hair, and he dons this incredible black armor, and he's got the black dragon helm that's got the wings that fold like back. It's just like, he describes him as his white hair like protruding through the black helmet like wisps of smoke, and that kind of stuff is just a nice touch. It really helps the reader visualize this character, and I think this is something that we don't do as much today though either. Like, this is, you know what I mean, like people do a lot, like authors are a lot more into the internal like workings of the characters nowadays, right? Like we like read and write the stuff of like what makes characters tick, and that's the things that we worry about more. But Elric on the outside is something that will just kind of burn into your head. Like, the imagery is there, and it's stunning, and it's impactful. You know what I mean? And that's, I think, something that we just don't see as much anymore because we're worried so much about the character's personality nowadays. Not that Elric doesn't have some kind of personality. I think that's another thing that keeps Elric somewhat ahead of his time, is that you have this guy, this character that's, he's a drug addict. Now, that is because of his blood, and he's just trying to kind of stay afloat, but still, that's not like something you would see back in the day, as well as just all around being a leader that is at odds with his people. Like, that's not that's, definitely something realistic, but not necessarily something you were going to see in fantasy back in the day. The other thing you're going to get in here from beginning to end is just magical items and magic, like to an extent that you just don't see like today, and you're getting magical swords, magical mirrors, magical ships, just magic coming at you. And I do want to say that the magical mirror in here and the aftermath of using it, all that stuff, like what happens with it, was just brilliantly done. This was probably one of my favorite parts, and just saying like, oh, magical mirror, it might sound cheesy because, like I said, yeah, maybe that sounds dated to you, but trust me, I feel like even today you could read this part and appreciate it for what it is and what happens. It's very well done, very well constructed. Probably my favorite part of the book. So, segueing off of magical items and everything, I want to talk about the swords, because we are introduced to the twin rune blades, Mournblade and Stormbringer. And Stormbringer is obviously going to be a bigger part. I'm sure both of these swords will be, but Stormbringer certainly has, a big part just even in this first book alone. And I want to touch at least a little bit on this sword and Elric, because Elric, being an addict, he needs these drugs just because his blood is weak. It's what keeps him, healthy or up and afloat. Now, Stormbringer will bring him this power, where he doesn't have to depend on these drugs. It will, rejuvenate him, but it comes at a cost. But the thing is I really like this because you're talking about an addiction, and then you're talking about introducing something to the addict that will kind of replace that addiction. But realistically, a lot of times what addicts do is they replace one addiction for another, and the cost is just as high or maybe even worse. And I'm, just kind of rubbing my hands together because I'm like, ooh, what kind of shit is Elric going to get into from wielding Stormbringer? Oof. We will find out. Next up, I want to talk about the tone, because Elric is heralded as, the grandfather of Grimdark, and I see why. Honestly, like, I know also a lot of people, say Glenn Cook and the Black Company, and while I'll say Black Company has a darker feel, Elric came out much earlier, and there are certain things here that I could see, like, this is where it kind of was the spark, right? There are definitely some sword swinging events in here that have swords, going into heads and, ripping through bodies and whatnot. Maybe not the most, like Mark Lawrence graphic or, Richard K. Morgan graphic style, but once again, this is older. For its time, this would be pretty fucking violent, honestly. And like I said too, with that, like, with some of the aftermath of some of this magic or the items that they're using, some of the deals that are being, done, it's just there's a lot of darkness that's in here. It might not be so, like, in your face. It might not have, like, it might not have the delivery that Grimdark today has. But goddamn, it's got all of the essence there. In all honesty, you got an anti-hero, you got drug addiction, you got violence. You got pretty much everything that went on to become Grimdark. Now, as far as my 2 cents for the slow and the struggling, I would say that this book is absolutely for you. You could literally read this in a day or two. Like I said, it's less than 200 pages. It would give you, like, a great glimpse into, like, what classic, sword and sorcery fantasy was like. Because honestly, like, Michael Moorcock is like the king of that shit. So yes, it is definitely worth your time if you're trying to get a little taste of, like, where things came from. It's a very fast-paced journey. You're going from plot point to plot point. You're not going to waste a whole lot of time on anything, but at the same time, Michael Moorcock will give you plenty of exposition where you do feel like you get a good feel for the world and for, Elric. All right, guys, as always, thanks for spending some time down here at the channel. And to Michael Moorcock, a kadoosh, 2 thumbs up. Thank you, you madman genius, you cool-ass dude. Thank you for having such a crazy-ass brain to do this whole Eternal Champions, multiverse creation, which gives us, characters like Corum and Elric, I salute you, sir, and thank you for building the foundation from which all the dark and dastardly was built upon that I get to enjoy today. Thank you. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. We will be continuing. Next month, I'll be going into book 2. And if anybody wants to join us, we are down on the Discord. The Elric read-along is really kind of just an unspoken read-along between some of us. But by all means, the more the merrier. There is an Elric channel tab on the Discord, so I'll leave a Discord link in the description. And there will be plenty of time for you guys to catch up. Like I said, it's a very quick read. You can blast that thing out in no time and then be side by side with us for the next one. All right? All right. If you're new, please like and subscribe. It really helps me grow the channel. As always, guys, peace.